very much, Claude. I feel like the other speakers have done the heavy lift here. Claude has reminded me of a very painful experience we had in the 1990s and briefed you on our recent performance. I think Michael, MAG is one of our larger, it has been one of our larger holdings for a number of years, and is reflective of what we try to do in our mining investing. And a point that I think would be difficult for him to make, but I think is true, is I think from both governance and capital allocation perspective, MAG is maybe almost as exceptional as it is on an asset quality perspective. And so I think there's something very impressive there. And then you all heard, I hope, Doug's presentation earlier. Doug and John at Tocqueville, I think, are really the gold standard in our industry in terms of analysis and the quality of the work that they do on the particular companies. We've been there for such a long time, and I think really Doug did a great job of describing where we are in the cycle. But I do want to pick a bone with Doug about the way he characterized, and I think is common to characterize investing in gold and gold mining stocks, and that's really what I want to talk about here today. And so I think many of us in this room see gold as a hedge against bad things happening, an insurance against other things going wrong. And to the extent that that's how you position gold investing and gold mining investing, I think you become, over time, I think you become part of the problem with investing in the industry. So let me explain to you what I mean. The idea that gold's success depends upon someone else's or something else's failure is a real structural problem for investing in this commodity and in this industry. We don't argue that gold is better than an alternative. We just say that it's a fail-safe in case the existing system breaks, and we have to leave open the possibility that the incumbent monetary system, for whatever reason, may come apart. And we're not in any way saying that gold's actually superior to the incumbent system. And I think that's where we have a problem. And there's two problems with this kind of line of reasoning that I've broadly outlined. One, I think it fails to accurately capture what gold can do from a substantive perspective. And two is I think it doesn't work socially. So let me go deeper on the second point with a famous quote from Charlie Munger. So here's what Munger had to say a couple of years ago at the University of Michigan talking about gold investing. He said, "I don't have the slightest interest in gold. I like understanding what works and what doesn't in human systems. To me, that's not optional. That's a moral obligation. If you're capable of understanding the world, you have a moral obligation to become rational. And I don't see how you become rational hoarding gold. Even if it works, you're a jerk." So let's unpack this. I like understanding what works and what doesn't work in human systems. So this is Munger's first and his critical, I think, in many ways assertion, is we're talking about financial markets, capital markets, investing, and Munger is defining markets as a human system, right? And I don't think we should accept that first assertion. Well, I think we'd all agree that markets don't exist independent of human beings. I don't think we refer to markets as human systems. That's a logical leap that's not supported by the fundamentals and completely dismisses the idea that markets are in any way natural. But once he makes that leap, then Munger castigates those who disagree with him. He goes on, "To me, that's not optional. That's a moral obligation." So let's be clear. We just went from an esoteric disagreement over whether or not markets are planned or spontaneous occurrences in the human society to Munger's assertion that we have a moral obligation to agree with him. He then piles on saying, if you're capable of understanding the world, this is it, you have a moral obligation to become rational. So wow, so the position of gold investors just got worse. Now, not only are we immoral, we're also irrational. So, and then he adds, and I don't see how you become rational hoarding gold. This is perhaps Munger's, I think, most fascinating point. That is somehow the mere act of holding gold, or hoarding gold, as you say, will impede our ability to become rational. This is, I think, in some senses, the most important point. What he's saying is that if you accept the market system as both good, but as a human creation, exclusively working within the system, is the rational, and here only rational choice. And so long as you, gold investors, retain a toehold outside the system, you will not only defend, you will not defend the system at all costs. And that is not a rational decision, kind of in Munger's framework. Munger then ends with a clincher that makes the quote so notable, which is, even if it works, right, you're a jerk. And that is that if the system starts to break, and you have been thoughtful enough to hold an asset outside the system, you're a jerk because you weren't helping the human system created for good, you were preparing for it to break. So here's the problem we have. It's not that we're not right? It's that we're a bunch of jerks if we own gold. And that's a social problem, but not a social problem in the sense of, you're at the cocktail circuit and, you're not getting the right respect. I think it's a real social problem that's going to generate, real regulation and blowback. So now those of you that have invested in gold for more than a few years know that gold investing is not this ticket to social popularity. Tech investing is better suited to that. But gold investors also know, and I think generally speaking, know their financial history. And I think many think, that reality will trump perception when the system shows enough signs of stress. Society will come around to see you all, us all, as right when we're proven right. And gold will be money more valuable than it is today, and bonds, again, will be certificates of confiscation. And your friends will ask you, how did you become so wise, like that guy that bought gold stocks in the 1960s, right? And as appealing as this, I think, scenario would be for gold investors, I, for one, don't think that social history can be repeated. So for starters, government debt in general, debt markets in general, are so much bigger than they were in the 1970s. Moreover, Bretton Woods, kind of gold as a formal money, has faded from our collective memory in a way that wasn't true 40 years ago. And so I think the reassertion of gold as money is going to be a much heavier lift today than it was in the 1970s. And more importantly, there doesn't seem to be any path, from my perspective, to financial stress that doesn't quickly become an existential threat to the system. So the financial architecture of the first world is no longer compatible with high real rates. I think we all know that. The world's simply too over-indebted. We're talking about economies with 3, 4, 500% debt to GDP. That's actual debt, that's not derivatives. And that compares with numbers in the 1970s that were less than 100%. It's just really not analogous. The moments aren't analogous. And so you can't save the system with high rates the way you could in the early 1980s under Volcker. Volcker couldn't be Volcker today, even if he had the same appointment. Which brings me back to the idea that gold investors are a bunch of jerks. So to refresh, according to Munger, the investment is irrational, immoral, and antisocial. So now add to that trifecta the idea that we're financing an industry that goes around and digs holes in the ground using cyanide to refine the ore. So now we're irrational, immoral, antisocial, and we're destroying the environment. So it should be no surprise to anyone that gold mining projects aren't fast-tracked anywhere. They're thwarted, they're stalled, and they're protested. Securing the social license to operate requires an extraordinary amount of community activity. The amount of sweet-talking and spending that's required to bring capital to some of the very poorest parts of the world is almost unimaginable to those who aren't on the front line. The simple truth is that doing something legal and doing something profitable is not enough to secure you or your company a social license to operate. Put starkly, the gold mining's industry's position, is a losing position that's not going to be fixed by being environmentally careful, using best practices, and by building better roads, better schools in these communities. It's not a problem that's going to get solved locally, to my mind, because the local problems are mainly downstream from the industry's bigger problem, namely that the product isn't seen as useful to society. So if you buy Munger's assumption, as I do, his statement is problematic for all of us and for the global mining industry in general. In this context of social disapproval, the industry's property rights are going to be very contingent property rights indeed. As the gold mining industry knows full well, just because you have something or you have a license to it doesn't mean that you can use it in any manner that you deem, or in any manner society or the local community may deem unproductive. societies over time tell us that we have to show how the use of the property is good for society, or our ownership will be encumbered in some way. You have to make the case for the public good. And the better the case for the public good, the more latitude you have to operate. So think about Google, right? So Google drove a car around our country, I think your country, I don't think you're around here, much of Europe, and they picked up your Wi-Fi address, your password, a bunch of your personal information, and we had a little kerfluffle over it, and then we kind of let them go on as they were, on the idea that they're adding so much value to society that really their intentions are good, and will overlook the fact that they just went around and snooped on all of us. So they have what would be kind of the most expansive, maybe, social license to operate. Gold, on the other hand, gives you an opportunity to be a jerk, and so the industry has absolutely no wiggle room. So even some of the best mining projects are hamstrung. MAG's a great example of a great operator, great governance, great projects, and it's just not that easy to get things moving. So how do we change this? What are the uses of gold that we can use to make the public case? There's basically two, jewelry and money. And so if I look at jewelry, I don't think that's the answer. Look at the diamond industry. The end result is jewelry is not going to give you a social license to operate, dig holes in the ground, use cyanide. It's not bad, but it's not necessary. I don't think it's going to cut it. I don't think it changes the dynamic. Which leaves us with money, which I think all of us would agree is important, is the highest use of gold. And moreover, we'd agree it's an enormous social good. Avoiding the double coincidence of wants is a real valuable thing to do. And moreover, gold, I think, and this is the argument I want to make, is clearly much better money than what most of the world has. In fact, I think it's incontestably better. So there's more than 200 countries around the world, and most of them, even to an absolutely ridiculous extent, have their own money. And the vast majority of those currencies don't make any sense. They don't hold their value, they can't be used for international trade, they're controlled. You can't take your Angolan kwanza and use it anywhere outside of the country. And in fact, the Angolan kwanza is one of the top reasons not to invest in Angola. These currencies are an easy mark. They're not necessary for the local banking system to function. They're horribly managed, and most of the local community is not banked. The local population is not banked anymore. Moreover, there should be no illusions that these also-ran currencies are going to be a first-world currency at any point ever. It's totally ridiculous. The Angolan kwanza is never going to be the Swiss franc. It's not going to happen. So they're more than just a nuisance, though. They're a serious cost. You never really know what's going to happen. Even for big countries, like take Brazil. You want to invest in Brazil? Is the real going to be 2 to the dollar or 4 to the dollar? You don't know. How do you make an investment decision? It's an absolute disaster, and it matters for the vast majority of the world's population. The problem, I think, as true as this argument is that it's been true for years. It doesn't really move opinion. People don't really care. But what's changed is that the first world currencies, and I think this is the moment we now have in 2016, the first world currencies aren't so great anymore. Okay, most notably, we may have to pay to use them, right? We have negative rates, and we may even have taxes on cash. So there's cost, clearly in sight costs, and there's clearly problems with the current system. So negative rates, I think, interestingly, even make what was long argued as one of gold's principal liabilities, its lack of yield, positive. On a relative basis, now it's better. Gold has lots of other positives. So use of gold as money prevents runaway trade deficits. It would remove America's exorbitant privilege. Maybe, I don't know if Europeans would be in favor of that. I think they would. Americans should be in favor of that as well, because our principal export in America is dollars, right? That's not good for our economy. It's like the oil curse. Gold money it actually reduces the cost of cross-border transactions. We are already seeing that to some extent with some of the technologies like Bitcoin. The blockchain, which distributes balance sheets, creates a system which is much more robust than the current system. But if, again, you centralize that with a centrally controlled money, you kind of defeat the underlying purpose of the blockchain. It's much better off with a decentralized money that doesn't have a centralized balance sheet. The blockchain, again, improves the integrity of transactions. The physical reality of gold, I think, could be an impediment to some of the worst problems with cybersecurity. Gold as money also ends too big to fail. So this distinction that central banks have been skirting around between insolvency and illiquidity, always saying they're solving the former, the latter, the illiquidity and not the insolvency, to the extent you're actually using gold as money, that again, that distinction is made real for central banks. And gold couldn't be used to make the rich richer like the current fiat money is being used, propping up financial assets, which is kind of the underlying context of the US political moment. And finally, the point I made earlier, I think it's fair to a larger fraction of the world's population. So all of that's true. There's many advantages, but I don't think we're going to overwhelm the current system with simple facts and arguments. I don't think that the piecemeal approach is going to work. I think there's lots of data there. Maybe you would be moved. I think if you look more generally, I think it's harder to move people and societies on big ideas like this, especially in what I think today is a very sentimental age where you have a lot of emotions involved. So let's be clear about what we're actually asking people to do to reconceptualize this, right? What we're arguing for is really changing the way people think. We're really asking people to reconceptualize their sense of progress, and that's a big ask. Notions of progress really go to the heart of what people's sense of meaning and purpose are, and aren't easy to change. So let me give you the dominant theory of progress that's kind of out there, and kind of what we're up against. So the story of progress is that money is a natural government monopoly. And despite the trouble with government money, this is still the case. The governments determine what constitutes money, not markets. Therefore, when the backing of gold and silver was removed, it didn't really matter the acceptance of dollars, pounds, francs. It was all unchanged. Moreover, governments can make new money, i.e. the euro, based on politics and not some sort of asset backing. Government money is the present and the future of money, the argument goes. Because government money is managed by experts that can finely tune it to society's needs. Right? This is the argument. The belief is that centralized expertise is better than nature, better than hard assets. And that reflects the evolution of money over time. Sure, gold and silver used to be used as money, but we've moved beyond that. We've improved that monetary technology. First, maybe with coinage, then milling, then improved it further with bills that represented a claim on gold and silver. Next, we got rid of the gold and silver, the underlying asset, and most recently, we've gotten rid of the bills and moved to electronic payment. According to this sequence of events, gold and silver are now 2 or 3 generations old in terms of the technology movement. And sure, there's people that are going to be nostalgic for the stuff, but the last real demand for gold will recede with the passing of another generation or two. This is the dominant argument still out there. But what if it's wrong? What if government money was just more efficient than gold coins? Or just more efficient than private banknotes prior to any modern means of communication? And the truth is that gold combined with electronic payments and the blockchain is really, I think, the most efficient solution. It's the more robust solution. It's the more fair solution. We took a detour with government control of money, but that detour is no longer necessary. It's no longer helpful. Moreover, the government monopoly is prone to abuse, and the costs are becoming more apparent to all of us. So in this light, I think we can begin to see gold as the future, not just the past. And nature is reflected in the mining industry as superior in some ways, a management tool to a bunch of economists with PhDs. This dynamic would change the way we think about the utility of gold mining and consequently renew the mining industry's social license to operate, which is kind of back to where we started. So let me close with an analogy that I think captures where we as a community and industry are when we talk about the gold industry and gold investors. We're saying our product is like typewriters. We know that computers are better. They enable us to do far more, faster, at a lot lower cost than typewriters. But maybe we should just keep a typewriter around, just in case. Maybe in case there's some horrible natural disaster, there's some horrible computer virus, and we all have to figure out exactly how to communicate without computers. And I think that's our argument, and I think that's a losing argument. Because you're not actually suggesting a better solution. Just that there's values in being long typewriters when the system blows up. And I don't know, look at the World Gold Council. Look at the case we're making as an industry. This is the case we're making. The reality, I think, is that gold's more like organic food. It's better than the industrial food that became ascendant in the middle part of the 20th century, right? Now we're going back to organic food. It's not exactly the same as the food we had 50, 60, 70 years ago, and it needs marketing and packaging. It's better. It's the better solution, and it's the future. We're not going back to the industrial food of the mid-20th century. So I think that if that vision is developed enough, I suspect there'll be a serious trickle down for the industry in terms of social license to operate, and that there will be a real industry of scale that's legitimate, and the guys go running around at mine sites with no reason whatsoever that are shutting down projects. I think they're going to be the jerks and not us. That's it. That's the idea. Thanks. So questions on that or the U.S. political scene? Yes?
Yeah, not seeing gold as a typewriter to have in storage closet, but rather something more forward-looking.
Yeah.
Do you see it as being more forward-looking, more integrated into the monetary fabric?
So look, it's happening right now. So if you look, I think Bitgold is one of the best examples, right? So they've gone from 0 to 1 million accounts and on their way to 4 or 5 million accounts. The simple utility that provides not so much those of us in the first world, but those in the third world is so much better than what the local currency provides. So I think you're going to see real scale there very quick, kind of something analogous to what we saw with mobile phones going back 10 years ago in the emerging world.
And the variation in price of like on a daily kind of basis that we see today, basically in gold, you don't think that is you think that'll just be completely absorbed as just as a forex risk?
So, yeah, so your transaction costs, remember we're competing against the Angolan kwanza, right? So you're in Angola, you want your Bitgold ounces or grams, or do you want Angolan kwanza? One has global portability, one has substantial asset backing, the other is a product of the local government. So what we're going to see is, I think we're going to see really rapid adoption in the third world. The other thing is that there are still governments, I think, rightly want a real hold on the information. Every time you have a crime, every time you have some problem in society, you're going to track the money. I think what we've seen is, I think we saw an industry that wanted total separation from government, grow up and decide that they had to be like Google and Facebook and everybody else that participates in the economy, and they had to be a good citizen, and they were going to provide all that information so the bad actors can be got, stopped, thwarted, tracked, whatever it is. But at the same time, we're going to provide that ease of use to the population. So some of the regulatory structures, especially in the first world, still need to be changed to allow the true competition to start. Anything else? Yes, Claude. Yeah. We hope Meg. Yeah, I mean, look, so I think Doug got it exactly right in his earlier presentation. I think you can buy really great gold mining companies at big value, discounts to their intrinsic value. I think MAG's a good example of that. If you notice, there's more and more and more, and I think the production figures Michael gave us were on the low end, and I think $15 silver is also on the low end. I think there's lots of great investments out there. I think EMP is still undervalued. Certainly in the U.S., we are sizable investors both in oil and natural gas E&P companies, and EM has had a horrible couple of years here. I think there is really good opportunity in EM. Some of our larger markets, Peru, I think is particularly interesting. There's not a lot of companies. We're also reasonably invested in the Middle East, the UAE in particular. So I think still there's good dislocation in emerging markets given all the stress. And finally, the big bubble everybody knows about is the bond market. I think there is good opportunity to short bonds. It's a highly manipulated market. I think you got to have a longer time horizon. But lending governments money for 20 years with a yield of 0 is a pretty good short position, I think, over a long period of time. Thank you very much.